Okay, inshallah, we'll go ahead and get started. Alhamdulillah, we're back to PowerPoint. We have our the PowerPoint the slide projector available. So we'll go ahead and get started. Bismillah, inna alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh, wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم. أما بعد. طيب, so we're continuing with the book Ad-Durar ul-Bahiyyah في المسائل الفقهية للإمام Muhammad ibn Ali Ash-Shawkaanee rahimahullah ta'ala, by Imam Muhammad ibn Ali Ash-Shawkaanee. And so we completed the section or the chapter of At-Tahara. Last week was the last of At-Tahara, Kitaab At-Tahara. And in that chapter, just going back really quickly, he began with Bab al-Miyah, the section dealing with water and the rules and regulations pertaining to water and its usage. Then we dealt with Bab al-Najasat, the section dealing with impurities, what things are considered ritually impure in Islam, which means those things that if you get them on your clothing, or if they're on your body, or if they're on the place where you want to perform prayer, they must be removed before you can offer the prayer. Okay, so we mean ritual impurities, najasat. Then he dealt the third bab, the third section was tathir najasat. He talked about what were the rules and regulations about how to cleanse impurities and how to remove things that are impure. Okay, then the fourth thing was bab qada al-hajah, the section dealing with answering. As we say in English, we say answering the call of nature. We'll say relieving oneself, because I don't think nature actually gives an adhan. But we'll say fulfilling your need, relieving your need, meaning using the restroom, okay? And the etiquettes of that. That's what that section dealt with. The fifth section was Bab al-Wudu, the section regarding al-Wudu. And he talked about what were the obligations, the al-wajibat fil wudu, the obligatory acts of wudu. The next, he dealt with the optional, the mustahabbat, the optional things, the recommended things regarding wudu. Then the sixth section was Bab Nawaqid al-Wudu, the section of what breaks the wudu, those things that break or nullify, if you will, the wudu. And then the seventh section was Bab al-Ghusl, the section dealing with complete bathing, ghusl, complete washing. Okay, washing, and what things require you to have to wash your entire body before being able to perform the acts of worship. Then the eighth was Babu Tayammum, the section dealing with dry cleansing with soil or earth or dry purification that takes the place of al-wudu and ghusl. Okay? And you want to pass this to her, inshallah? All right, she's coming. I guess she's coming. Okay, there you go. Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh. Okay, so the ninth Bab al-Tasi', the ninth section was Bab al-Hayd, the section regarding menstruation and the rules and regulations regarding menstruation. And also he dealt with an-nifas, which is postpartum or postnatal bleeding after childbearing. So now we move. Those were all of the abwab, all of the sections in Kitab al-Tahara, the chapter of purification in this book Ad-Durar ul-Bahiyyah fil Masail al-Fiqhiyah. So now we're moving on to the second chapter, Kitab al-Thani, and that is Kitab al-Salah, the chapter of the prayer. And the first section of it is Bab al-Mawaaqeet, the section that deals with Al-Mawaaqeet. And Al-Mawaaqeet means the times of the prayer, the timings of the prayer. So he said, Bismillah, Imam Ash-Shawkaanee, we will go forward and read the matan, the text. He says, أول وقت الظهر الزوال. Okay. So he begins with Ad-Duhr, okay? And he says, أول وقت الظهر الزوال. The beginning of the time of the Dhuhr prayer is Az-Zawal. Zawal means high noon. It's when the sun is at its apex in the sky. It's at the highest point of rising in the sky in the middle of the day, midday, okay? And then he goes on, he says, وَآخِرُهُ مَصِيرُ ظِلِّ شَيْءٍ مِثْلُهُ سِوَى فَيَ الزَّوَالِ. So he says, the last or the end part of dhuhr is when the shadow of the object becomes like it, meaning the shadow of the object is equal to it in height. Okay, And he says, besides the amount of the shadow present at zawal time. So what is he saying by that? What is he talking about that? So basically he's saying, and I'm going to click forward because there's a picture here that I want you all to see. Okay? Can you all see that picture? Okay. On the left you see a small tree or shrub, if you will, next to a house. Okay? A little small shrub or tree. On the right you see some mailboxes that looks like a typical American street, probably in the south, because in the north they usually have sidewalks. So that's probably in the southern, might be down the street from here, you know. But what I want you to notice in this picture, the shadows of the objects. So what you're going to learn in Islam is, I know we use prayer charts, okay, and there's nothing wrong with the prayer chart. Sheikh bin Baz and a lot of the Lajna, the Committee of Senior Muftis in Saudi Arabia, they've given fatwa that it's permissible, it's yajuz, it's jaiz, to use the charts, the qa'imat of Al-Mawaaqeet salat, the prayer charts, prayer timetables. There's nothing wrong with using that. That's fine, okay? But in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, of course, they didn't have prayer charts. They didn't have the timetables in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. So they didn't say go and look on the kitchen refrigerator and see what the chart says for dhuhr. They had to look at what Allah, had created in nature to determine when was the time of prayers, when were the prayer times, okay? So, and regarding that, so he's beginning with Salatul Dhuhr. He says the time of Dhuhr, it begins at zawal. That means when the sun is at its peak, its apex in the sky, the highest point in the sky, okay? High noon, we say in English, or midday, exactly midday, okay? And its time ends when the shadow of the thing, he says, when the shadow of the object, whatever object you're talking about, becomes like it, meaning becomes the same height, okay? When the shadow of an object becomes the same height as that object, that is the end of the time of dhuhr, Salatul Dhuhr, okay? So you see, for example, if I lived in that house on the left, and I didn't have my watch, and I was not near a prayer chart, and I knew I had been doing some work, and I realized that, it's getting late, and I have not prayed Salatul Dhuhr, what can I do? I will look at that tree and see, does it have a shadow? And if the shadow is less than the height of the tree, then I know that I still have some time to pray dhuhr. If the shadow is equal to the object or greater than the object, then I know that means I missed the time of dhuhr. Okay? That's the point he's making. Okay? So like for example, if you look at the picture on the right, you see the post for the mailbox there. Look at that post and then look at the shadow. Is that shadow longer than the post? So probably on that picture it's asr time there. It's not dhuhr. That person, if they didn't pray dhuhr and they look at the shadow there, they should assume that I missed dhuhr. I can still go ahead and pray it, but I'm making it up. I missed the time of it. Okay, you all understand? This is a way you can always use, as long as it's not a cloudy. Now it becomes difficult if it's a cloudy day. You just have to estimate. But if the sun is out, you can always use objects in Allah's creation. To look and see what does the shadow look like, so I can tell during the daytime when is the time for the prayer. Where? You want Ahmed Had? You want one? Okay, so that was the point he was making there. Okay, so the next thing he said is he says except besides the amount of shadow present at the time of zawal, and what that's talking about is that the sun doesn't always rise and set directly in the east and the west. Okay, so even at zawal time, when the sun is at its peak in the sky, this object still may have some shadow. The object may have some shadow. It will be small, but there will be some shadow there. Okay, it won't be void of a shadow at all. So he's saying minus that part, that if you add whatever's that when the sun is at its peak and how much of a shadow is there, okay, you add that into the amount of when you're looking at the total height of that object. That's what he's talking about. It would be easy if I could draw it out, but I don't have a whiteboard here to demonstrate what it's talking about. But hopefully we can come back to it. If you don't understand it, I'll try to explain it better than that, inshallah. Okay. So, and so then he also says, وَهُوَ أَوَّلُ وَقْتِ الْعَصْرِ, and that is the beginning of the asr time, the asr prayer. Okay, meaning that when this object is equal to the height of its shadow, or the shadow is equal to the height of the object, that is the beginning. He says that is أَوَّلُ وَقْتِ الْعَصْرِ. That is the beginning of the time of the asr prayer. Okay. So then moving on, okay, he says, وَآخِرُهُ مَا دَامَتِ الشَّمْسُ بَيْضَاءُ نَقِيَّةٌ, and he says, and the end of asr time is as long as the sun stays bright, white, and clear. Okay. So regarding this, I have an asterisk there in the slides, and the reason is because there's a note of a point that I want to mention here, a special note here that I want to mention. And he says, هذا آخر وقت الاختيار ويبقى وقت أهل الأعذار إلى غروب الشمس كالحائض تطهر أو الصبي يبلغ أو الكافر يسلم أو المجنون يفيق والنائم يستيقظ فيلزمهم العصر. So what he's saying here, he says, okay, so here Imam Ash-Shawkaanee is saying that the time of Asr, it ends when it lasts as long as the sun stays bright and white and clear in the sky. Okay. So, but the issue is that towards the end of the Asr time, before the sun sets, the sun gets a yellowy haze to it. Okay. And so it could be implied from reading this that the person missed the Asr prayer if they wait till the sun appears like that. Okay. But if the sun is high in the sky, it's typically, I don't know how a lot of you all grew up in your countries, but here in the United States, we were always told by our parents, don't look at the sun because it'll ruin your eyes. The brightness of it, the radiation, the ultraviolet rays, however you want to look at it, depending upon how much scientific knowledge your parents had. But they would tell you never look directly at the sun, So as kids, we were always afraid to look at the sun. Now, some of us who were brave like me and who like to, test things, I would take quick looks and quick peek and see what would happen. And I was like, nothing happens. I see some spots, but my eyes I still can see. But the point is, when you look at the sun like that, it will be clear. Okay, it will be clear and bright, as he says here, bayda naqiyya, white and clean, clear. But as the sun begins to set, it gets lower and gets closer to the time of the ghurub al-shams. Oh no, that's good. Alhamdulillah. I mean, can everyone hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So I can look at their face. No, I'm good. Alhamdulillah. They don't have to look at my face. But when the sun gets closer to the time of sunset, it gets hazy. It gets a hazy look and it becomes more yellowish or orange. Okay. So that time that's past the time of Asr, according to some of the madhahib and some of the hadiths also. Okay. But there are other hadiths that suggest, so what's the combination between those hadiths and the other hadith that say that the person has until the sun sets, ghurub al-shams? Well, the point he says is, this is the time, he says, هذا آخر وقت الاختيار. This is the end, meaning that time is the best time to pray it. That's the preferred time to pray it. That you do not delay Asr until the sun is almost ready to set and it's a hazy orange ball. You should rather pray it when it's white and clean and clear and high in the sky. When it gets low like that, this is really, you've delayed it really longer than you really should have. Okay. But he says the other time, he says, وَيَبْقَى وَقْتُ أَهْلِ الْأَعْذَارِ. But the time that remains before the sun sets, but it has lost that white clearness, but it's now orange and hazy looking, hazy rays on it, and it's orange or yellowish, and it's not clear white, meaning it's getting low, it's getting time for Maghrib. And you can tell when it's getting close to time for Maghrib. Okay, you can tell, you can look, the sky is looking different, looking orange in the western hemisphere. The sun is still up, but it's not like it was in the early part of Asr. You can tell it's getting ready to set. That time, he said, that is the time of the people who ahlul a'dhar, the people who have excuses for delaying. Okay, these are people who have excuses for delaying the prayer, and he gives examples of who they are. Okay, he said those people, they have all the way up until the sun sets. He says, for example, like he says, kal ha'id tathur, like the woman who's on her menstrual cycle. If let's say she's on her menses, and before the sun sets, she becomes clean, her menstrual cycle ends. She becomes pure from her menstrual cycle. It ends, and the sun is still up. Okay, so that may happen towards the end of the time of the Asr prayer. So that's still fine for her. It's still, that time is a mercy, exception for her. That is fine to pray it at that time. He says, "Oh, as-sabi yablugh," or the child who reaches the age of puberty. He's saying if you want to be really technical, a child maybe comes in, maybe it's a girl. She gets her menstrual cycle during the daytime, during Asr. Okay, her first time, Hayd al-Ula, the first one, Hayd al-Awwal, the first Hayd, first time she ever had menses, okay? And it happens to her in the daytime of Asr, but towards the late time, right before sunset. Guess what? She's considered she's considered an adult at that time. But she wouldn't have to make up that prayer. But for people like, for example, like let's say it's a boy or something like this, who has any of the signs of puberty that happens to him during the daytime of Asr, then he would have to make that prayer. But the point is, if it happens towards the end of the day, they all have all the way up until the sunset to make that prayer. And then he also says another person. He says, Al-Kafir Yuslim, the disbeliever who accepts Islam. Let's say someone was not a Muslim, but then they accepted Islam in the masjid, and it was Asr time, but it was like, when is Maghrib now? Like 8 o'clock, 8:05? Let's say they accepted Islam at 7:59, 7:50, 7:55, they took Shahada in the Musalla. Guess what? They're obligated to pray Salat al-Asr. But he says this time is they're min ahl al-a'dhar. He said they're the people who have an excuse to delay it up until the sunset, because they just, it just became obligatory upon them at that late time, And he says, or awal majnoon yafiq. This is talking about the crazy person, the person who lost their senses, but then they came back to regain their sanity or came back to their senses, and it was during that time, that late time. These are his examples he's given. He says, an-na'im yastayqid, or the sleeping person. Let's say a person was asleep, okay? After they took what we call qaylula, they took their nap after dhuhr, and they slept through the beginning of Asr time, and they woke up, and it's 7:30. Maghrib comes in at 8. They're at the end time, but that's an excuse. They're excused because they were sleeping. It's okay for them to pray at that time. But the point is, he's saying normally, if you don't have any excuse, any udhr, shar'i, legislated excuse, you should pray at the time when the sun is, white and clear. He says, bayda naqiyya. When the shams is bayda naqiyya, clear and white like this, okay? So then he goes on. He says, wa awwal waqt al-maghrib ghurub al-shams. Okay? He says the beginning of the maghrib time is when the sun sets. The beginning of the maghrib time is when sun sets. Okay? And this is wa akhiruhu dhihab al-shafaq al-ahmar. And he says the end of the maghrib time, the ending time of it, is when the red glow leaves the horizon. Okay? So if you pray Salatul Maghrib in its early time, that's going to be like right after the sunset. Okay? But let's say you're doing something, you caught up with something, or you were asleep or something like this, and you need to find out, can I pray it before, I need to catch it before it goes out. What you're going to look at is you're going to look at the horizon in the sky. You're going to look to the west where the sun set. Okay? And as long as there's still that, we call it twilight. In English we say it's the reddish glow, reddish orange glow in the sky. You can tell the difference between the Maghrib sky and the Isha sky, because the sky during the time of Isha is completely black. It's completely aswad. You'll see stars clearly. And even if you look in the west, it's black. But if you look to the west towards the Ghurub al-Shams, towards the Maghrib, the west, okay, towards the place where the sun set, and it may be dark in the sky above you, but if you look to the west and you still see that glow, that reddish glow, he calls ahmar, this reddish glow like this, that's still Maghrib time. You still caught it, okay? But when that goes away and the sky is completely black, then this is the Isha time, okay? And so he says, وَهُوَ أَوْلَ الْعِشَاء, and that is the beginning of the Isha time. That is the beginning of the Isha time, okay? And he says, وَآخِرُهُ نِصْفَ اللَّيْلِ, and the ending of the Isha time, he says, is the middle of the night. The middle of the night, okay? Now let me say to you all this. I'm going to ask you all a question. Is Nisf al-Layl, the middle of the night, is that 12 a.m.? Is that midnight? Is Nisf al-Layl, is it midnight?
3 a.m.
Is it? What is Nisf al-Layl? Okay, so the point I want to make to you all about this is, don't be confused by the clock, the hands on the clock, and what this is actually talking about. Nisf al-Layl means the muntasif, the middle of the nighttime. So when does the night begin? The night begins when the sun sets, actually. Okay? And the night ends. When does the night end?
3 a.m.
No, the night ends with Fajr, with the beginning of the Fajr, okay? A subh sadiq, the true sunrise. The Fajr time comes in, that's the end of night, okay? Whatever you pray before Fajr time comes in, that's why we call it what? Qiyam al-Layl. It's night prayer. Whatever you pray before Fajr, that's Qiyam al-Layl, okay? That's night, that's part of your tahajjud, your night prayer, okay? So the night prayer ends when Fajr starts, okay? The night ends, and the night begins when the sun sets, okay? So half of that, the midpoint of that, that's the Nisf al-Layl, that's the middle of the night. It's not always 12 a.m. It's not always midnight. Some parts of the year, it's 11:40, 11:30. Some parts of the year, it may be almost 1 o'clock in the morning, It just depends. You have to look and see, based upon when was sunrise and when was sunset. What's the middle of that? What's half of that? Okay, that middle point, that's when the Isha prayer ends. That's the ending of the Isha prayer. Okay. So is that clear? Do you all understand that? And this is based off of, and he's basing this off of hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. For example, there's one in Sahih Muslim where the Prophet was taught the prayer by Angel Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam. Jibreel descended and he taught, for 2 days he came to the Prophet ﷺ, teaching him the times of the prayer in this hadith. Okay, and the first day he came and he showed the Prophet ﷺ the beginning times of the prayer, and it's as the Shaykh described it here. Okay. With the beginning of Dhuhr, he prayed it when it was at the Zawal, right at right at midday. When midday, right after the passing of midday, that's when Jibreel prayed with Prophet Muhammad ﷺ the Dhuhr prayer. Okay, and then when the sun reached, or when the shadow of the object was equal to the length of the object, he came back to the Prophet and he prayed Asr with the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, then when the sun set, he came back to this is Jibreel, Angel Jibreel alayhi salam. He came back and he prayed Maghrib with the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, and then when the horizon, okay, the red glow of the horizon went away. Ash-Shafaq al-Ahmar, the red glow of the horizon, west part of the sky, when that went away, he came back and he prayed Isha, led the Prophet, prayed Isha with the Prophet. Okay, that was the first day. Then the second day he came back and he prayed in the last time, end of the times with the Prophet. And it's all these things that the Shaykh is saying. So all this is based on the hadith of the Prophet. Hadith is in Sahih Muslim and others. Al-Imam Muslim collected in his Sahih, and it's in other collections as well. It's authentic hadith. Nah. So moving on, he says regarding the Fajr prayer, he says وَأَوْلُ وَقْتِ الْفَجْرِ, he says إِذَا انشَقَّ الْفَجْرُ وَآخِرُهُ طُلُوعِ الشَّمْسِ. The beginning of the time of Fajr is when at the first crack of, we say in English, in the United States, we say the crack of dawn. Okay, all right, it's that first crack of light that appears over the horizon in the eastern sky. All right, and for people who are city dwellers like us, that's not easy to see. Okay, it's not easy to see for several reasons. You have a lot of buildings, okay, houses, and if you live near the city, skyscrapers. If you live Western Medina downtown, it's hard to see that because there's a lot of things in the way. Then also you have night lights, street lights, and things like that are going to affect your vision of that. So it's difficult for someone who's a city dweller in the United States to look for the white strip of light that's going to be over the horizon. Typically, you're not going to be able to see the horizon. There are going to be houses and everything, all type of things, blocking your view of the actual horizon. Okay. Now, someone who lives on the outskirts of town, or they live out in the country, for example, okay, out on a farm in Murfreesboro, Smyrna somewhere, they may be able to see that because they have farmland out there, valleys and stuff, and they can see when that first crack of white light stretches across the eastern horizon. Okay, but that's the beginning of the Fajr time. And for the reason of what I just said, when Sheikh bin Baz, rahimahullah ta'ala, there was a fatwa, he was asked about this, is it permissible to use these prayer charts to determine this? He said, for people who are in the city, yes, it's permissible for them to use it. He said, because it would be too much difficulty upon them to go outside the city every day to look for when Fajr comes in. So he said they should rely upon the charts for that. And, inshallah, if the charts are trustworthy, they rely on the charts. And he said, la basa bihi, there's no problem, they should use it, okay? But for someone who lives out in the, like in an area where they can see it, they can get it, they can see for themselves about when it comes in. They look and they can see the white part of those. And I'm not saying they can't use prayer charts, but I'm just saying if they want to verify the chart for themselves and say, the chart says it comes in at 4:35 today. Let me see. I can look and see. Well, hey, actually it came in at 4:50. So the chart is off. That person knows my chart is off. But someone who lives in the city, it's going to be difficult for them to do that. Okay. But anyway, that's another issue. So that's the beginning of the Fajr prayer. Okay. He says, وَآخِرُهُ طُلُوعِ الشَّمْسِ. And the ending of the Fajr time is when the sun actually rises, meaning when the sun actually comes up over the horizon. That's when Fajr time is over. Okay. And usually for those who are new Muslims or who don't know, that time period usually will last about maybe an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and a half, something like this. Meaning how long the Fajr time will last. It varies throughout the year because the seasons change, it varies. But typically it's going to be at least an hour and maybe 15 minutes, hour, 10 minutes, sometimes even an hour and a half, that time will last from the beginning of the first crack of dawn all the way up until the sun rises. It's usually going to be about that amount of time. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. So then he goes on. He says, وَمَنْ نَامَ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِ أَوْ سَهَى عَنْهَا فَوَقْتُهَا حِينَ يَذْكُرُهَا. He says, so the person who sleeps past his time of prayer, okay, they sleep past the prayer time, meaning they slept through the prayer, okay, or he accidentally forgets to pray. He accidentally forgets to pray. He says, then its time is whenever he remembers to pray it, okay. And this is based upon a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet said, whoever has, slept through the prayer, okay, or they forgot it, then its time is when they remember it. Let them pray. They make it pray it when they remember it, or when they wake up. In the mayastaqid, when the person wakes up, they pray it. Or in the mayadhkur, when the person remembers, he prays it. Okay. All right. Well, there's no sin upon the person. Okay. And of course, this is talking about accidentally forgetting the prayer or sleeping through it. This is not saying that the person says, well, I know Fajr comes in at 4:30 and I have till 5:20 to pray it, but I'm going to stay up late and watch this movie, so I'm just going to set my alarm clock for 8 o'clock. That's not what this is talking about. This means the person accidentally, slept through the prayer, not the person intentionally, made up his mind that I'm going to get up and pray Fajr at 8, No, that's not permissible. La yajuz. It's not permissible to do that, okay? So this is the exception is the Prophet is giving here in that hadith that supports this, what the Shaykh is mentioning, is based on the person who accidentally does that, okay? So then, moving on. So he says, okay, regarding the person who has excuse, okay, he says, وَمَنْ كَانَ مَعْذُورًا وَأَدْرَكَ رَكْعَةً فَقَدْ أَدْرَكَهَا. So whoever has a valid excuse for praying the prayer late, and he catches it, even a single bowing of it, okay, before its time goes out, then he is considered to have caught it, okay. So the point is, let's say you're going, like we were talking about before, that the preferred time to pray the Asr prayer, the Shaykh said, is when the Shams is bayda naqiyya, when it's white and clear in the sky, okay, up high, for the Asr prayer, okay. And he said, for the when it becomes, has this hazy glow on it, orangish glow, hazy glow, and it's getting closer to time to Maghrib, then he said this is the time for Ahlul A'dhar, the people who have excuses, okay. So let's say you're of the people who have an excuse, like you slept, you took a nap, like we said, after Dhuhr, you had lunch, you had a heavy lunch, the itis kicked in. I don't know if you all know about the itis. The itis is when you eat something heavy, so heavy lunch, whatever, and then, you got, oh man, I get to go lay down, So we say your parasympathetics kick in, the sleeping nervous system or what have you. So you go to sleep, but you sleep heavily, okay? So then you wake up, and let's say Maghrib comes in at 8 o'clock, you wake up at 7:50 or 7:55, okay? So you're like, oh man, subhanAllah, the sun's about to set, and I've been sleeping all this time. So you run, you go make your wudu, you rush, to make your wudu, whatever, filling all the conditions, etc. of wudu, doing it properly according to the sunnah. And you go to pray Salatul Asr because you're trying to catch it before the sun sets, okay? Because he said that's the time for Ahlul A'dhar, people who have exceptional condition situations. So he's saying as long as you catch a bowing of it, then you catch one rak'ah, because catching the ruku' is catching the rak'ah. If you catch that, then he said you've considered to have caught the prayer. You understand? That what I just laid out for you was just an example of that, a scenario. Okay? You can apply that to other prayers too, Fajr, whatever, any other prayer. But he's saying as long as you catch man adraka rak'atan faqad adrakaha. Whoever caught a single unit of the prayer, he caught at least the bowing of that prayer, then he's considered to have caught the entire prayer. Okay? He caught the entire prayer. All right. All right. All right.
What about, for example, you say we are sleeping and like the coming Ramadan, we are here and to waiting after the Salat and as are waiting and we are sleeping here. Unfortunately, when we are wake up, it's 5 minutes or less for Maghrib. And we go into praying Asr and make wudu.
Okay.
At the same time, maybe the azan is the muazzin is like azan for Maghrib. So
right. And you're saying you haven't prayed Asr.
Which one we go? We have to pray first Asr.
You should pray Asr. Of course you try to pray Asr. You try to catch it, even if it's a rak'ah, like he said, of Asr. And even if let's say even the muazzin calls the adhan, okay, and you're in the bathroom making wudu, so you come out and the adhan has been called. It's time for Maghrib now. Still, you pray Asr. You pray Asr because the Prophet said, for the one who nama anha, then the time waqtuha, this time for him is in the mayastaqid. When he wakes up, the mayastaqid, that's his time. So you wake up, you perform, you try to catch it in his time. You try to pray it if you can in his time. But if you miss the time, because you are, like he says, min ahl al-a'dhar, you have the people who have an excuse. You unintentionally, you slept, okay? So when that hadith applies to you about if the one who sleeps who sleeps through the prayer, then when he wakes up, then that he prays it, that its time is when he wakes up or when he remembers, okay? So you pray, you will go, while everyone is getting ready for Maghrib, you will be praying Asr, That's what you should do. You pray Asr. You don't say, oh, well, I missed it, Oh, well, I'll just sit here and wait for Maghrib. I'm just not going to pray that prayer, No, you go ahead and pray it because you were sleeping. You had a valid excuse. You weren't just sitting around or something, twiddling your thumbs, or saying intentionally, well, I'm just not going to pray, Like some people may, may Allah's refuge is sought. Some people, they just know that they're awake, they're not, they're not sick, nothing's wrong with them, and they know it's time for the prayer, and they just consciously, consciously they make the decision, I'm not going to pray. Okay, I mean, people do this. I mean, I'm not going to, we don't sit here and pretend like we live in, lollipop and rainbow land where everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. Muslims will do that. Muslims may do that. This is wrong. This is a sin to do that. Okay, but this is not talking about what you're saying. What you're saying is the person who unintentionally dishonored you. You didn't intend to do that. So when you wake up, you pray, inshallah.
So after, okay, I understand what you're saying. So shall we? I mean, the Muslims make azan, and when we finish the wudu, and they come and standing, and after that, shall we follow and we have to make niyyah for
yeah,
us,
this is
we have to pray.
I've heard a couple of scholars answer this. Sheikh bin Baz and Sheikh Uthaymeen answered this question before. Sheikh Uthaymeen and Jibril, inshallah, you can help us out with this, Jibril and Ahmed al-Hadi, if you all have this information about this. But what I remember from a fatwa of Sheikh Al-Uthaymeen about this, asking this exact question which you're talking about, I figure you're probably going to try to go there. But he said the scholars differ about this. There's ikhtilaf amongst the ulama about how the person handles that. Okay, he said of them there are those who say that the person prays the prayer with a different intention of the Imam. They make their intention for Asr, and the Imam's intention is for Maghrib, okay? Because he said it's not a condition that you have the same intention as your Imam. And there are evidences from the Prophet ﷺ about him praying a prayer and the people behind him were praying something else, a different prayer. Or like the hadith of Mu'adh bin Jabal, where he would pray with the Prophet ﷺ Isha, and then he would go back to his people and lead them in Isha prayer, and so he would pray Isha again, but it would be an optional prayer for him, whereas they were praying their obligatory Isha. You see what I'm saying? So the intention of the person who's being led in prayer doesn't have to be the same as the intention of the Imam. So, going back to what he was saying, the person makes their intentions to pray the Asr prayer, and the Imam is praying Maghrib. Now, that seems odd, because what's going to happen? The Imam is praying through the rakahs, and the person has to pray 4. So, Shaykh al-Taymin said he can do one of two things. He either can sit while I take it back. He either can, when the Imam makes his taslim, I had it confused. I'm thinking of the person who played Maghrib and the Imam is praying Isha. This is not that bad. The person has to pray 4 rakahs. So when the Imam salams out, he stands up and makes his 4th rakah. Okay, I was getting confused. When the Imam salams out after the 3 rakahs, he stands up and makes his 4th rakah because his intention was from Asr. Okay, but there's another thing he addressed. If the person, let's say the person missed Maghrib and the Imam is praying Isha, that's where he said the person has two options. He said the person can either, when the Imam stands up for the 4th rakah, and this is the person who's making a Maghrib that they didn't catch. Okay, he said they can sit. Just stay there sitting in tashahhud while the Imam completes the 4th rakah. And then when the Imam sits for tashahhud, he salams out with the Imam. He said he can do it that way. That's one thing. Or the other, with the Imam. Okay. The other way is when the Imam finishes the 3rd rakah and stands up for the 4th, he said he salams out because he finishes 3rd rakah. And then he would stand up and start the first rakah of Isha when the Imam is praying the last rakah of Isha. You understand? And so then when the Imam finishes, he has to stand up and make up 3 rakahs for Isha. You understand? So it's, the fatwa was like this. I don't remember. It was that was the gist of it. There was he might have brought some other, statements, but that was the gist of what he was saying. Jibril, you have something to add to that? Anything? Right.
Now, it was very, very close to Maghrib time, so he missed 2.
Right.
So he was saying, do I pray Asr time within its time because the Dhuhr time is already gone?
Right.
Right? Or do I
keep the tartib, the order?
Yeah, keep the tartib. I told him, I said, you should probably keep the tartib.
Right.
Keep the tartib. And I said, I have heard the scholars say, well, you can pray that when it's time to pray, but I believe what is more rajih is that you
Keep the tartib.
Yeah,
Right.
keep
The
it
order.
organized.
Right.
Even if the other one loses its time.
You're the people who have an excuse, from the sleep. No, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. No, alhamdulillah. So alhamdulillah, you get these different. Ahmed, how do you have something to add?
The only time you can use the tartib is if you are, the only time that you can use the tartib if you are scared that the time you can, for example, you're praying Maghrib. The Maghrib is time that you can still pray Asr.
Mm.
If you don't have the time for that Maghrib, or you're scared the Maghrib also will go, then you can start with the Maghrib.
Right.
Or if you have Jahl,
No.
For example, you wake up, Maghrib time is running out, it's almost about to go, and you didn't pray the Asr. So then now you pray Maghrib because Maghrib time is going on. After that, you pray.
He's saying the opposite. He's saying don't keep the tartib. There are some scholars who said that the tartib is not. I've heard that opinion, but yeah, right, no, but yeah, Allah Ta'ala a'lam. So anyway, when we were saying tartib, that's order. For the people who don't know Arabic, we keep saying tartib. They're like, what are they talking about? It means keeping the prayers in order. Don't jumble up the order of the prayers. So then he goes on. He says, "وَتَوْقِيت wajib," and praying the prayers in their proper times is obligatory. And of course, this is based on the statement of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, where He says, "Inna salata kanat ala al-mu'minina kitaban mawquta." Verily, the prayer has been enjoined upon the believers at fixed times, fixed stated, obligatory times. So keeping the keeping up with the timings of the prayer, he says, is obligatory. Okay. So, طيب, going on, he says, "Wal-jam'u li'udhrin jaiz," and combining the prayers, meaning Dhuhr with Asr and Maghrib with Isha, is permissible with a valid excuse. Okay. So since we're in the bab of Al-Mawaaqeet, we're talking about keeping the times of the prayers. He's talking about, okay, well, what about al-jam'? Al-jam' is combining between prayers, and we know there are certain prayers that are permissible to combine between for certain legislated allowances in the Sharia. Okay, and so they are combining Dhuhr with Asr, and that can be in the time of the first one. Or it can be in the time of the last. Taqdeem, they say taqdeem and ta'khir, the scholars say. Taqdeem means in the time of the earlier prayer, meaning in the time of dhuhr. Ta'khir would be praying both in the time of the asr prayer, okay? And then Maghrib with Isha. Maghrib and Isha can be prayed together. Either same way, taqdeeman, meaning in the time of Maghrib and Isha, prayed in the time of Maghrib, and or Maghrib and Isha, ta'khiran, prayed in the time of the last prayer of them, which is the Isha prayer. And regarding that, there was something I wanted to mention here that he said this. Okay, and he brought a statement. He said from Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma. It brings a narration from Ibn Abbas. He said, "Salla Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam al-dhuhr wal-asr jami'an wal-maghrib wal-isha jami'an min ghayri khawfin wala safrin." Rawahu Muslim. وفي رواية للنسائي قال من غير خوف ولا مطر. قيل له لما؟ قال لئلا يكونوا على أمته حرج. So he says, it's reported from Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, that he said that the Prophet ﷺ prayed the Dhuhr prayer and the Asr prayer together. And he prayed Maghrib and Isha prayers together. He prayed those prayers together. He said, and it was not due to any fear, meaning fear of an enemy or some harm or anything like this, like for battle or anything like that, and nor was it because he was traveling. Okay, and this hadith is in Sahih Muslim. And there's another wording of it that Imam An-Nasa'i brings. The Shaykh Al-Bani graded it authentic. That he said the Prophet ﷺ did that also. He said without any fear, and nor due to rain. And so the narrators, they said, the people who Ibn Abbas was narrating this to, they said lima. They said why? And he said so that there would not be any difficulty upon the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. So discussing this, I've heard some of the scholars say, these are some of the narrations that you find, like the people, the Rawafid, the Shiites, they use this and they just make the prayers three times of prayer in a day. And so every day they're making jam'ah between Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha. Okay. No, there are 5 prayers and they have 5 distinct times. The Prophet ﷺ did this just to make an ease upon the ummah that if you have a reason to do it, you can do that, if it's necessary. Okay. So some of the scholars, they mentioned that if you have, something, for example, they say, for example, rain. Okay. they say it's a proof that Ibn Abbas said he did it and there was no rain. They understood from that meant that sometimes the Prophet and the companions would combine the prayers because of rain. So Ibn Abbas made it a point to say it here, to say that the Prophet sometimes did it even if it wasn't raining. You understand? So in other words, why would the Ibn Abbas mention rain? He's mentioned that because it was known that the Prophet and the companions, the Prophet would allow them to combine the prayers, and when they were not traveling, they were غير مسافرين, they were muqimun. They were people in their locality combining them because of rain. Okay, weather conditions like this. Okay, and also journey. He of course mentioned journey because we know that you can combine the prayers when you're traveling. Okay, actually you should combine you can combine the prayers when you are traveling. So the point is, though, that it is from the Sunnah to implement this, in your life. Not that you do it every day. You should not do it every day. You should keep the regular times of the prayer. But it's, if you did it once or twice or something like this for a reason, okay, like this. Let's say you had some reason or something like that to make things easy. You could do that. Okay, you could do that. But it should not be your habit. That it was not in other words, not the Sunnah of the Prophet that every day he was combining Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha. That's not the way that it was established that's not what's well known, a sunnah al-mashhura, the well-known sunnah, what was established, okay? But it is, the Prophet did that on occasion to show that if you have to do it, if it's necessary, you can do that. You understand? I hope it's clear. Okay, all right. So moving on. No.
How do we know what is necessary? Like, as a reason, what's a valid reason or valid excuse?
No.
For combining prayers.
Mm-hmm. The things that we know, and he's going to talk about this later on in the book, because really right now we're talking about the Mawaaqeet, so he talks about it more later. But the things that the Prophet would combine the prayers for are, of course, traveling, okay, for rain, as we've discussed. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, there's a narration about combining for illness, but they're supposedly not authentic. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, and also in Ad-Durar ul-Bahiyyah, the Sharh of Ad-Durar ul-Bahiyyah, it's mentioned in the footnotes when we get further in there. It talks about that it mentions those narrations, but they're not authentic. But it mentions Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah in Majmu' al-Fatawa, he gives a fatwa saying that it is permissible to combine prayers for illness if a person is marid, if a person is sick, if there's going to be some difficulty upon the person. And that's the thing from the narration that Ibn Abbas has mentioned. The Prophet did this so that there would not be any difficulty upon his ummah. So Ibn Taymiyyah is like, even though those narrations aren't authentic, min hayth sanid, in reference to their chains of narration, but the meaning of difficulty, if the person has some difficulty, something that would make things easier for them if they're on some medication and they're praying or whatever, and it's hard for them to stay up for all of the individual prayer times, then to make it easy upon them, they combine the prayers, So it's a lot of these things. There's not necessarily a cut and dry for every last thing, but it's kind of like you look into the person's individual situation. What really is going to provide a difficulty for them or not, or what's, you can't just use it just to be lazy. In other words, just I could pray, but I'm just lazy. I want to watch the game later. I want to watch the game. So I'm gonna combine prayer so I can watch the game. But that's not, okay, if you want to watch the game, there's halftime, there's timeouts. Cut the TV off and make it and pray. What's more important on the day of judgment? Allah's not going to ask you how many points did Wade hit, or LeBron, He's going to ask you about your salat, though. It's going to be the first thing you're going to be accountable about for is the salat. So you have to give the prioritize what's important, But if you literally have a difficulty, meaning, like I said, like some physical inhibition or some like illness or something like this, or something of that nature, then then you can combine the prayers if it's going to make things easier for you. And Allah Ta'ala a'lam, I don't know of any other beyond that, any dawabit beyond that, other than what I've just mentioned. If you know of something, inshallah you can add. No. Right. Right, you're taking medicine, maybe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. You're not. Right. So then he goes, pray Maghrib and Isha. Right. But the thing was that he was like, well, he wanted to catch the game. How did I guess that? He wanted to catch the ball game. He knew that if he didn't go, pray now, that he wasn't going to get up during the game. I said, well, just because you know that, it's not. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, what they say? Yeah, of course, legged Jews. Yeah, not permissible. Yeah. So anyway, طيب, okay. So moving on. Okay, so moving on. The next thing he talks about, he says, mutayammum. Mutayammum is the person who has made tayammum. وناقص الصلاة أو الطهارة يصلون كغيرهم من غير تأخير. So he says that the person who is praying with a tayammum, or he's praying in a deficient manner, meaning leaving out some precondition. Okay, what this is talking about, let's say if the person has to pray sitting, or they have to pray lying down. This is what he's talking about. He says when he says naqis as-salat, the person who's naqis as-salat. He says naqis as-salat المعذور الذي يترك شيئا منها لمرض ونحوه كمن يصلي من جلوس لعدم قدرته على القيام أو من يصلي على جنب. So he said, like, for example, naqis as-salah is the person who has some type of excuse where they're leaving out one of these pillars of the prayer, something within the prayer, because they have some excuse, some reason to do so, due to, like, he says, for example, due to illness or something like that. He says, or like the person who prays sitting due to them not having the ability to stand, or the person who prays while lying on their side because they cannot stand or sit. Okay, so he says he calls them naqis as-salat, meaning there's something they're leaving out of the prayer, but they have an excuse. They have an excuse to leave it out, but they're not praying it, in the full way that a normal person would pray. Okay, and the first person is the person who had to make prayer because they had to make tayammum to pray. In other words, they didn't make wudu. They didn't have enough water. They could not use water. They made tayammum. Okay, or he says the person who does not. He says naqis at-tahara, the person who does not have a tahara. So you may ask, what is naqis at-tahara? He says the person, for example, who has continuous bawl. They have leaking of urine. Okay, they have an illness where the urine continues to leak, from their private part. Or rih da'im, or they have a flatulence. What is it? Flatulence? Where they continue breaking wind. Flatulence. Yeah, that's when the person breaks wind constantly. That's how you say it, right? Yeah, it's flatulence. Yeah, flatulence. This is what flagellance. Yeah, flagellance. Yeah, something like this. It means the person they continually break wind. It's not intentional, but they have a constant gas problem. Okay, like that, where it's like a medical conditions like this. Okay, he's just giving examples of people who are naqis at-tahara. Okay. Or he says, أو على ثوبه أو بدنه نجاسة ولا يتمكن من تطهيرها إلا بعد خروج الوقت. He says, or like the person who has some impurity on his garment or upon his body, and he's not able to cleanse it off. If he did, it would be outside of the time of the prayer. If he took the time to get it off or cleanse it, he would miss the prayer. Okay, so he's saying that the person just goes ahead and prays. They do their best to remove. If they can't, the time's going out. They have to pray like that. They just have to pray how they are. Okay, with the najasa on them. Okay. Or the person who has the constant flow of dripping of urine, or the person constantly breaking their wudu due to passing gas. Okay, he called these people naqis at-tahara. They're deficient in their purification. So he says, what about them? يُصَلُّونَ كَغَيْرِهِمْ مِنْ غَيْرِ تَأْخِيرٍ. They pray just like others besides them, meaning who don't have these problems, and they do not delay the prayer because of these things. You see, this is what he's saying. That's why he says مِنْ غَيْرِ تَأْخِيرٍ, without delaying. In other words, they don't use these things to say, well, I just have to wait, and and I'll pray it later, because I can't right now because I keep breaking wind, or I can't pray now because I have, I was outside at the Eid picnic, and we were playing the game of pickup football, and I went deep for a pass, and I slipped and fell in some dog doo-doo, and it's on my shirt. Okay, so now it's time to pray, and I'm at the park. I'm not at home where I can just put it in the washing machine. Okay. So I tried to get it off, but there's still some stain on my shirt, whatever. And it's time to pray. The prayer's getting ready to go out. We got to pray Dhuhr. Then he says they pray كَغَيْرِهِمْ, like others besides them, مِنْ غَيْرِ تَأْخِيرٍ, they don't delay the prayer because of that. Okay, this is the point he's making. Okay. طيب, let's see. أيوة. That's okay.
So, he said a lot of times he'll be out there, and as he's working there, something will come out or something will come on his clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, is it okay for me to delay the salah until I get home, and it'll go out of its time? Or should I pray in my,
Right.
state.
Right.
And
According to what Shawkaanee, you remember Shawkaanee saying he's supposed to just go ahead and pray. He shouldn't delay the prayer because of that. Of course, he tries to remove it, or if he can bring a change of clothes, or have something that he can put on instead of it for prayer, take that off and just pray with his T-shirt on instead of the jumpsuit from the job, and then put that back on after the prayer. But if he can't do it, there's no way he can do it. He's saying he shouldn't delay the prayer.
no, he was by himself. He's at work.
Even for example, like let's say a person who's in the
Well, he should choose. Well,
I mean, if it is regular, it doesn't happen.
uh-huh.
You have to prepare as a
Right, right. And he's made a good point. He's saying if it happens regularly, the person knows it happens, regularly, every day or often, then he should be prepared, meaning by having a change, something that he can use for salat when it's time for salat, and take it,
That was what I had them suggest.
Yeah.
That's your job. Your job is when it doesn't happen often.
Hmm.
Take a set of clothes.
Right.
You can't get something going if you don't get clean water.
Right, yep.
Even if you have to take 20 liters of water,
Hmm.
you
Right.
have that with your car. Not an you can purify yourself.
Right.
accordingly.
Right.
It just takes a little bit of preparation.
Right.
I thought it would just, since you were just saying that,
Hmm.
you just reminded me how it takes.
No, yeah.
I'm sorry.
No problem. Let best. It's good. The thing I was going to add to that, though, is, for example, like a person who's in some type of situation where, we hear about these things, and may Allah protect us from these type of things, but where a person is a prisoner of some sort, they're being held in captivity or something like this, and, they say they strip them, and so they're left in a cell or whatever, and they have no clothes, Maybe they're in what do you call it? Solitary. Thank you. Yeah, solitary, and they don't have any clothes or whatever like that or whatever, and they're Muslim, okay? And so they say, well, one of the shurut of the prayer is that is to cover the awrah. Yeah. The person has to cover his awrah. Okay. So the person can't say, well, I'm naked, so I just got to wait till I get out of this situation. So I'm not going to pray for 7 days till I get out of solitary. No, the person still has to try to pray. Even if they have to pray in their condition. They don't have any clothes, they don't have any way to get any clothes. And the scholars say they pray how they are. They just pray how they are. This is an exception. Doesn't mean that normally you just go around the house praying naked. But it's just in the extraneous circumstances. Under circumstances that it's not the norm. Okay, it's outside of what you're capable of doing. Then you pray in your situation. If it's something that's outside of your control, then Allah will forgive you for that, and you pray how you are. Allah Ta'ala a'lam. No. So then he goes on, okay, so he says, وَأَوْقَاتِ الْكِرَاهَةِ فِي غَيْرِ مَكَّةِ, and so the times that are disliked to pray in regarding the places other than Mecca, and when he says Mecca, he's talking about Al-Masjid al-Haram. In the footnotes it says, when he says Mecca, he's talking about the Haram, okay. These times are what? It says, بَعْدَ الْفَجْرِ حَتَّى تَرْتَفِعَ الشَّمْسِ. It's after the Fajr prayer until the sun rises, okay. After the Fajr prayer until the sun rises. وَعِنْدَ زَوَالِ فِي غَيْرِ يَوْمِ الْجُمُعَةِ. He says, and also when the sun is exactly at high noon, at its peak in the sky, on days other than Jumu'ah. And we'll talk about that in a moment, inshallah. And then he says, وَبَعْدَ الْعَصْرِ حَتَّى تَغْرِبْ. And then after the Asr prayer until the sun sets. Okay? He says he calls these awqat al-kiraha, the times of that it's disliked to the times that it's disliked to pray. So, طيب, in reference to that, there was something I wanted to mention. In reference to that, I can't remember. It was a point I wanted to make that I just mentioned. Yeah, he says al-murad bin Mecca al-Haram. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So this issue talking about when the sun is at its when the Jumu'ah prayer. He says inda zawali fi ghayri yawm al-Jumu'ah, that it's disliked to pray at exactly high noon, except for Jumu'ah on Friday. Okay. He says wa istithna al-Jumu'ah ثبت بحديث ضعيف رواه الشافعي في مسنده وفيه إبراهيم بن محمد وإسحاق بن عبد الله بن, and he gives these people these different names, these narrators, they're matrukan. He says they're rejected. Okay, so he says in reference to the exception that's been made for Jumu'ah that Imam Ash-Shawkaanee is mentioning here, he said it's been mentioned, confirmed, but it's from a hadith that is weak. Okay, there's a weak hadith that mentions an exception that on the day of Jumu'ah, that you should not pray when the sun is at the zawal, at its zenith, we say, at its peak, except for Jumu'ah. There's a hadith that mentions that. Imam Shafi'i brings it in his musnad, but he says it is a weak, how this hadith is weak, okay? So in other words, the sharih, the person who's explaining the book, he's saying that Imam Ash-Shawkaanee is saying this, but this is based off of a weak hadith, okay? And he brings why. He says the two of the narrators are matrukani, means these narrators have been abandoned. They have some weakness in them, okay? And he says Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani declared this hadith to be weak, but anyway, he says, but what's sufficient for us that we can use as a proof, not negating what Ash-Shawkaanee is saying, just the hadith that says this specifically, that Jumu'ah is an exception regarding Zawal, that hadith specifically is not authentic. But there's a hadith that takes its place, that suffices us, that still proves this matter. And it's reported by Imam Muslim in his Sahih on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that he said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, whoever performs ghusl, and then he comes for Jumu'ah, then he prays whatever Allah has decreed for him to pray, okay? Meaning before the Jumu'ah starts. Then when the khutbah begins, he pays attention and he's silent, okay, until the Imam completes the khutbah. Then he prays along with the Imam, يُصَلِّ مَعَهُ غُفِرَ لَهُ مَا بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ الْجُمْعَةِ الْأُخْرَى. He says, and he will be forgiven for that and whatever was between that Jumu'ah and the other Jumu'ah, and along with that, ثَلَاثِ أَيَّام, more than 3 days, more than that, I mean like 10 days of forgiveness he will get. And of course, these hadiths that mention this, the scholars say, this is talking about from the Sagha'ir. This is not talking about forgiveness for the Kaba'ir, the major sins. For the Kaba'ir, they say you have to make labud min tawbah. You have to make tawbah, okay? But whenever the Prophet would say, غُفِرَ لَهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِهِ, or غُفِرَ لَهُ مَا بَيْنَ الْجُمُعَةِ وَالْجُمْعَةِ الْأُخْرَى, whatever like this, he's talking about min as-Sagha'ir, from the minor sins, okay? They will be wiped away for him, okay? But if he commits a kabira, min al-kaba'ir, a major sin, okay, like zina, adultery, or something of like this, some major sin like this, okay, whatever the other major sins, and refer to Imam al-Dhahabi's book Al-Kaba'ir if you want to find out about the major sins specifically. But whoever commits any of those things, then they have to make tawbah for it. They can't just say, well, I'll just pray Jumu'ah and then Allah forgive me for doing that haram, that major thing. Okay, no, they have to make specific tawbah for that thing. Tawbah means repentance. They have to make specific repentance to Allah for that thing. Okay. So, but what's the proof in that? Do you all see the proof in that? That's what I want to ask you. And we'll stop with this, inshallah. This is the end. I think this is the last slide anyway. Yeah, that's the end. Okay. So, but what's the proof in that? Why did he say this? He said the hadith is mentioned specifically that the zawal, the sun, not that you should not pray. It's disliked to pray when the sun is at its zenith, the apex, the peak in the sky, except for on Jumu'ah. That hadith is weak. But he said this hadith takes its place. So we still can apply that. What's the proof from that hadith? Can you see wajh al-istidlal, I'm saying? What's the shahid? What's the proof in that hadith? That it's okay to pray when the sun is at its peak. On Jumu'ah, on Friday. من اغتسل ثم أتى الجمعة فصلى ما قدر له ثم انصت حتى يفرغ الإمام من خطبته ثم يصلي معه غفر له ما بينه وبين الجمعة الأخرى وفضل 3 أيام. Okay. So what's the proof in it? How is that a proof that he's saying that takes the place of the other hadith, showing that it's okay to pray during Zawal time on Jumu'ah when maybe it's not on other days? That's it. When he says, so the hadith, he says, whoever performs ghusl, then he comes to Jumu'ah, and he prays whatever Allah decrees for him to pray, he prays whatever he wants, prays as much as he wants. Then, when it's time for the khutbah, he pays attention, and he listens all the way until the Imam completes the khutbah, right? Then he prays with the Imam, he will be forgiven, etc., to the end of the hadith, ila akhir al-hadith, okay? But the point is, as Jibreel said, Jazahullahu khairan, that in the hadith, the Prophet mentions that the man comes before Jumu'ah, okay? He comes before the Jumu'ah, okay? And he prays, and he says, he makes his ghusl, he comes and he prays whatever Allah wants for him to pray. Meaning he's praying optional prayers, The Prophet didn't say he prays optional prayers, but if it's Zawal, he has to stop praying. He said pray whatever he wants to pray. Whatever Allah decrees him to pray, he prays it, Then when the time for the Jumu'ah, then he sits and pays attention to the Imam, whatever. So he's saying this is showing that on Jumu'ah, there's not a specific, kiraha about praying, wait, the sun is at its peak, you got to stop praying. That doesn't apply for Jumu'ah, okay? All right. And then also in reference to the thing about praying after Asr prayer, okay? Yes, there's a narration about this, that the person should not, shouldn't pray when the sun is getting ready to set or before the sun sets like this, okay? There's a karaha for this, okay, a dislike for that. But there is a narration that is in Sahih Bukhari, I believe, and Aisha narrated it, about the Prophet, I'm coming home after the Asr prayer, and he came home and he prayed 2 rak'ahs in the house, okay? So it's not This nahi is not for tahreem. That's what I'm saying. It's not forbidden. It's not haram to pray after asr. That's the point. And it's narrated from Aisha, and like I said in Sahih Bukhari, that she saw the Prophet after the asr prayer. He came in the house and he prayed 2 optional rak'ahs. Okay. Was it Salama? I thought it was Aisha. I may be mistaken. He says he thinks it's Salama. I thought it was Aisha, but maybe I may have forgotten. He might be reminding me. Allah Ta'ala Alam. But we'll say for sure, one of the Prophet's wives narrated in Sahih Bukhari that she saw him praying Salatul Asr when he came home. Okay, all right. So this is showing that. So what is that showing us? That it's not, the nahi is not for tahreem. The other narration that prohibits praying before after the Asr prayer until the Ghurub al-Shams is not for tahreem. It's just kiraha, of dislike. Okay. Right. To make it after the salah. Yeah. There's also a narration about it. I can't remember right now. It slips my mind about a man doing that, but I can't remember. I think it's authentic, but I'm not sure. So in my mind, it's been a long time since I studied that issue, what you're talking about. But I remember there being a narration mentioned about a man making making up the sunan of Fajr after the prayer, and that it was okay. But I specifically, I would have to go back and look and find it. So I don't want to tell you something wrong, lie on the prophets or something like this. But I remember something like that, and in my mind, I remember it being authentic, but I'm not certain about it. Do you remember anything about this, Jibreel? Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's some narration about it, but from what I remember right now, that comes to my mind is that it's supposedly authentic, that it's allowed to do that, But this is like and he mentions something about this. For example, let me see. He mentioned something about it. I wanted to read it. Okay, here it is. He says, وَيُبَاحُ فِي هَذِهِ الْأَوْقَاتِ صَلَاةٌ مَا لَهَا سَبَبٌ كَسُنَّةِ الْوُضُوءِ وَأَمَّا الْمَنْهِي عَنْهُ فَهُوَ النَّفْلُ الْمُطْلَقُ. Okay, so he says, so it's permissible in these times. Prayers are permissible. It's permissible to make prayers in this time if it has a specific reason. That it have a sabab, a specific prayer. Okay, so for example, he said like كَسُنَّةِ الْوُضُوءِ, the sunnah of wudu. Okay, or like Sheikh bin Baz said, rahimahullah ta'ala. Sheikh bin Baz gave a fatwa about a person who comes in the masjid and it's after Asr time and it's before Maghrib. Okay, it's before Maghrib. The adhan for Maghrib hasn't been called. Is it okay for the person to pray Tahiyatul Masjid? Or what should they do? Because it's after Salatul Asr and the sun's getting ready to set. Okay, all right. So Sheikh bin Baz said the hadith, the zahir of the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that none of you should sit, and when he enters the masjid, he should not sit until he prays 2 rak'ahs. Okay, he said this is given precedence over the general prohibition of praying after Asr, after Asr. He said because this is a salat that has a sabab, like he's saying here, has a specific reason for it. Okay, so he said this thing that is khas, it supersedes that thing which is am, this nahi that is am. Okay, this amr that is khas, this specific command is muqaddam ala nahi that is am, is given precedence over the prohibition that's just a general prohibition. So Sheikh bin Baz said the person, even if he said if the sun is setting, if you come in the masjid, he said you could pray tahiyatul masjid, because it's a specific reason you're doing it for. But just in general, just to pray while I'm sitting here in the masjid, let me just get up and pray 2 rak'ahs while the sun is setting, then this is no, you shouldn't do that. Inshallah, it's clear. You all understand that? Inshallah. Allah Ta'ala. So we'll start with this. That's the end. That's all we have today. This is a little guy making salat, So apparently he caught it before the sun set, so that's good for him. No. Right, no. Right. إذا أقيمت الصلاة لا صلاة إلا المكتوبة. When the Prophet said when the iqam is given for the prayer, then there's no prayer except for the obligatory one that's being prayed. No. This is incorrect. This is incorrect. There's a narration from the Prophet. This happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. There's a narration that a man was doing this, and the Iqam was called, and the man was praying, and the Prophet ﷺ told him, "This is better than that." He stopped him. This is better than that. Okay. So he stopped him. From doing it.
Even if you pray already one rakat,
You right. No, Sheikh Uthaymeen said, Sheikh Uthaymeen, also Sheikh Muqbil said this too, that there's no dalil for making a taslim for it. He said there's no evidence for salaming out. When the iqamah is called, that broke your prayer. Your sunnah prayer was finished when the iqamah was called, so you don't salam out. There's not an evidence for it.
Even if you finish one rak'ah and
No. Now Sheikh Uthaymeen added in his fatwa about it, Sheikh Uthaymeen said, if you're close to finishing, let's say you're in the last tashahhud of the last rak'ah, he said, then inshallah go ahead and hastily finish it. But he added that in his fatwa. Shaykh al-Uthaymeen said that when he was asked about this. He said, if you're close to finishing and you think you can finish before the takbir of ihram to begin the prayer, he said, then go ahead and finish. But in general though, he said the same thing that Sheikh Muqbil rahimahullah said, that when the iqam is called, you should join the people in the prayer. You shouldn't keep praying something else on the side while the people are praying their obligatory prayer. Rak'ah. No.
One rak'ah is considered the minimum amount. So if you have less than one rak'ah, then it's not really considered salah.
No.
You look at it from this language.
Right, from the lugha, yeah.
They said that it's not really considered a salah. So if you have less than a salah remaining, basically you can hasten your salah, then you can go to them. Hopefully you can catch it. That's something, some model, something.
Right. A rule that you can use to kind of, yeah. Right. Right, yeah, I've seen this too. Yeah, I've seen it. You're like, what's going on over there? Yeah, I've seen that. No. So we go, of course, we always give precedence to the authentic hadith of the Messenger of Allah over anyone's opinion, of course. This is from our religion. That's why we say Muhammad Rasulullah. We believe he's the Messenger of Allah. So, we give precedence to his statement over anyone, any madhab or anything like this, or any ara or madahib or anything like this. Jazakallahu khairan. So inshallah we'll stop with that. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. So next week inshallah we'll have he goes into Babul Adhan, and then so we'll probably do that and Bab Shurutu Salah. So we'll take both of those two sections next week. Babul Adhan wa Bab Shurutu Salah, the section of the adhan and the section of the preconditions for the prayer. What are the things that must be in place for you to begin or enter into the prayer? Nah. So inshallah that will be it. I mean,